Hello, everyone. This is part 2 of week 6 of Plato, a class on the Protagoras, Phaedo, and Sophist. We continue to talk about the Phaedo. Socrates presented an argument for the immortality of the soul, which is called the Affinity argument. And his interlocutors, Simmias and Cebes, they still have worries and concerns, and they are not completely persuaded. Now, we will talk about Simmias' objection next week, and today I want to talk about Cebes' objection. Both of them are very influential, partly because they, as it were, lay out in a metaphorical way basic options in metaphysics and the philosophy of mind. So one needs to, as it were, work one's way through the metaphors in order to see what it is that is being suggested here. And both of their objections involve reference to tools and artifacts. In Simmias' case, it is the harmony of a musical instrument. In Cebes' case, it is that he talks about a weaver weaving a dress. So here's how it goes. The idea would be that the soul is a weaver, or like a weaver, weaving a dress where the body is the dress. Now, the weaver is going to make a lot of dresses, but eventually the weaver is worn out and dies, and the dresses that the weaver made are going to die more quickly or be worn out and fall apart more quickly than the weaver. But still, eventually also the weaver dies. And this is how it could be with soul and body. And first note about this, it is important to see that Cebes here introduces a further qualification in how we think about immortality when we think about the immortality of the soul, namely that we are not just interested in the soul surviving the body, even though that is how we sometimes put it. You know, the afterlife, you want the soul to survive the body. But strictly speaking, that is not enough because, and that is sort of part of the upshot of the comparison, it wouldn't really be enough for what we want if the soul survived longer than the body, but eventually also died. That is not, strictly speaking, immortality. So even though the kind of analogy between soul and weaver calls strict immortality into question, it does work with one of the premises from the affinity argument, namely that the soul is somehow superior to the body and rules. And that is sort of built into the comparison. The soul makes the body. And I want to just invite you to reflect on this dependence relation, in part because it is so different, in fact, reverse of the kind of dependence relation that is often envisaged in modern philosophy of mind or modern metaphysics. Now, just a little bit about that to help us think it through. Here are two types of modern positions where the thought is that one way or another, what is mental is dependent on what is physical. And those are then the modern terms, mental and physical. Those are not Plato's terms. He talks about the soul and the body. There's a lot to say about the difference, you know, in frameworks and so on. But we will set that aside for now and just think about this dependence relation. So in some modern proposals, the thought is that the soul or the mental or mental states, mental processes, mental activities supervene on the physical, where that roughly means that there's not going to be, or there cannot be anything different in mental states if there isn't also something different in physical states. The specifics of how this supervenience relation should be formulated are subject to huge debate, but roughly the thought is nothing different in mental states, if not also something different in physical states. Now, you can see that here the dependence relation runs the other way around. The mental is dependent on the physical. A somewhat richer kind of modern metaphysical theory might be what is called emergence, where the thought is that the soul emerges or the mind emerges from the physical. And that often works with something like the Supervenes claim, but it is a richer theory because we are really talking about the soul as it were emerging from or arising from the physical. And there's also a kind of emphasis on a certain level of autonomy of that which emerges. So the soul is quite different, or the mind is quite different from the physical, but it emerges from it. Nevertheless, the dependence relation runs in the kind of way that is the opposite from the idea that Cebes entertains, namely the mental depends on the physical. And for now, I just want to invite you to think, through these modern proposals and just ask yourself, what would it mean to reverse them? And would that get close to Cebes' proposal? And what does it mean for a kind of larger metaphysical outlook to take seriously the idea that the soul is superior to the body, and that in one way or another, the body or the physical could be dependent on the mind?